At 7 p.m. This meeting is taking place in person at 29 Highland Avenue, room 227 in Salem. You can also join via Zoom using the link posted in the meeting agenda. First order of business is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the regular school committee agenda.
I'll second.
Motion made by Member Cruz, seconded by Member Miranda. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, the matter carries. Public comment. The Salem School Committee would like to hear from the public on issues that affect the school district and are within the scope of the committee's responsibilities. Spanish interpretation is available for anyone who needs it. The members of the school committee would like to remind the public that Salem Public School students regularly attend school committee meetings. We encourage all meeting participants to model respectful and productive public discourse for our young learners. Public comment in the chambers. Please, you can approach the podium if you wish. Public comment on Zoom.
I do not see any hands raised.
Raise your hands. All right.
There's.
Oh. Come on up. You can use the podium. Yeah.
There's an actual podium.
Yeah. Sorry.
Hi. Okay. Good evening. So I wrote some things down. I don't know how much time I have. Probably like a minute or two.
Yep. It's
right?
a 3-minute limit.
Understand. So my name's Sol Maria. Some of you know me. I see a lot of familiar faces here. And I'm an alumna of Salem Public Schools. I attended Horace Mann back when it was on Lafayette. Loring Ave, right? Loring Ave, yes. And Collins, Salem High School. I have 3 children who all attended Salem schools for the majority of their education thus far. My oldest is at Salem Academy due to some personal situations. So 2 of my children are currently Salem Public School students, and they both have IEPs. And I feel that, it's important for children to have stability. And I think that, changes have happened in our district before. And, there's certain trends that I'm noticing now more than ever. I think Salem in general has become less of a family-friendly environment. I know I did get your email, Dr. Z, about, the whole UNICEF designation. I don't know if you guys were here when Nathaniel Bowditch closed. My oldest was in kindergarten when that happened. It's something that she still talks about to this day. So I just want to, it's a lot of things I wrote down here, but bottom line, I just want us to keep in mind the most vulnerable when we're making these decisions. If there's any way, because, talking about Salt and Stella, well, it's no longer K through 8. It was the K through 5 back in the day, too. I know we're talking about numbers. But again, in terms of trends, I think it's important that we consider why those numbers have dwindled or changed or whatever the case may be. And that has a lot to do with the affordability of Salem, which that's another topic for another day. But yeah, I'll be following this very closely, but I really think that we should be careful when we're considering all of the facts, especially the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right. Next item on our agenda is approval of the consent agenda. These are the minutes of the school committee meeting of October 20th, approval of a field trip for the Salem High School basketball team, December 17th to the 22nd, and approval of the warrants of October 23rd and October 30th.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Seconded.
Motion made by Member Cruz, seconded by Member Campbell. Under discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? And the matter carries unanimous. Student representatives report. Sydney.
Good evening, everybody. For tonight's student representative report, I have decided to speak a little bit on our student advisory yearly project. This year, we are focusing on ways to welcome mid-year transfer students, especially those who are ELs or those who have moved from a different district or a different state. We looked through a bunch of articles today, and we found different ways that different schools have been working through this issue, and a few ways that we decided are good ideas that we will also be starting to implement are a welcoming committee, which directly works one-on-one with newcomer students and actively involves students of the high school who share similar interests to newcomers, such as like favorite sports or like a favorite activity that they like to do at school, and they bond these students that already go to the high school with the newcomers. We also decided on a student transfer committee, which will be more so a counselor and teacher, but also student-led. And this group will be working towards making decisions on things that new transfer students should be aware of, such as like the grading system or the locations of every class. And we also read about a web program, which is where a person touches base with the newcomer students to see how they're acclimating to the school and how they're feeling as they're transitioning to a brand new school. And we also have decided that we might go ahead and create a survey for every newcomer student as well to help us with the welcoming committee portion of it, so that we can find the best student volunteers to pair with the newcomer students. And student advisory has also decided to spend the next few weeks before Thanksgiving break going around and talking to as many EL students and as many new transfer students that we can find, so that we can get opinions on what they also think would be the most beneficial and what they think should be definitely implemented in the community. Thank you so much.
Cindy, any questions from committee members? Member Cruz?
And thank you, Cindy, for the presentation. And really excited that you're all thinking about some of the students that might be joining us in the district, as this is usually the time where we start seeing some influxes. My question centers around any of the most recent meetings that you've had with Dr. Shrike, if there's any key things that you want to report out from there. But also, one of the statutory requirements of this committee is that we are supposed to have a bi-monthly meeting with the Student Advisory Council. So we haven't done that. We've had a student representative, so would love to be able to support you with that, as you have 2 liaisons at the moment on the committee that are assigned to work with the Student Advisory Council, myself and Member Campbell. And we're transitioning very soon, so would love to just find some time for us to connect to be able to support you with getting that meeting up and running.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great with me. It's really just a matter of everybody's schedules.
And we can support that, so we can work around the student schedule. I think we can make it virtual, whatever's easiest.
Yeah, I think Dr. Zreik and the student advisory were talking about that today, sometime around 5:30. Dr. Zreik was going to
Well,
send.
yeah, we did talk about, I was going to send an email to see who might be available. It's hard, the schedule, our students have busier schedules than any of us. And rightfully so, we want to respect that. But I did throw out to them that even if I could get a group of them to come, maybe before the next school committee meeting, that we could do a meeting in person then. And some of them said they would be able to come to that. So I think we could get at least a group of them here for the next session.
Yeah, I think maybe some gastro diplomacy, get some
Yeah,
food.
I did throw pizza out there, yeah.
Okay.
So I will, we'll definitely follow up with that. But I did broach it today. Sydney's my evidence that I did ask that today. I'm not protecting them from the school committee, I promise you that, so.
That's never happened before.
Never. So, yes, we definitely need to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Member Campbell?
I was just going to say, I really appreciate your project idea and that you guys have been so thoughtful in terms of inclusivity of voice and really identifying a need in a way that makes students feel more welcomed and settled into the school. And I love that you're considering the feedback of students who have gone through that process of arriving someplace that's brand new to kind of figure out what would have made their transition easier. And then would just add, it might be a great chance to get them involved in the student advisory if they're not already. As you start to get opinions, it could be a good recruitment point as well.
Adding on to what you just said, actually, we are working to get an EL student into student advisory. There is a member of student advisory. I won't mention her name because I don't know if she wants that or not, but she is friends with someone who is an EL student, and the student was very interested in joining, so we'll be touching base with them as well. So I feel like we need the inclusivity and the diversity.
Member Cornell.
I have a piece of advice. I've heard that high school students are tired of being bribed with pizza, and I think Chipotle is actually a pretty good option.
Yeah.
Let the record reflect. Any further questions for our student representative? All right, seeing none. Superintendent's report.
Yeah, good evening. I would just add one thing that on Wednesday we're going to launch the Operations Hero, the facilities reporting issues that high schoolers will now be able to report issues that they see in the facilities, not just staff. And so Z, our facilities director, was meeting with the students today, and on Wednesday we'll launch on ClassLink so that New Liberty students, Salem Prep, and Salem High students can report issues that they see around the building for repair. So we're excited about launching that on Wednesday, as we don't have school tomorrow. Before we start with the presentation I think everybody is here for tonight, I do love that now we have people in the front row. I love how you're just as bad as any student class. Nobody sits in the front row here for this presentation, but thank you to those that came in and sat in the front row. I do just want to, on a very positive note, I would like to just call out congratulations to our 3 Salem High School athletics teams that made the playoffs, girls volleyball, girls soccer, and football. Really proud that our girls teams have had outstanding seasons. It's the year of our girls sports this year, and it's really encouraging to see our teams making the playoffs, and the girls soccer team is playing right now, but whatever they do, they've all made us proud this season, and it's been fun to watch them. And then I do a big shout out to the Salem High School band program and color guard. It is nothing short of extraordinary that they won the Division IV state championship, and they had a police escort late last night as they came back into the city. Really proud of Mr. Shurtak and all. I mean, there's so many people I'm going to forget somebody, so I won't say all the staff, but to all the students, we have an outstanding program that just keeps getting stronger and stronger. So congratulations to all those folks, and it's a reminder of why we do the work we do, and Salem students are making us proud in a lot of different things that they're doing. So congratulations to all those athletes and musicians. So tonight we have one long presentation, which I think has a lot of important information. We are very fortunate to have 2 consultants that have worked with us on this project, and I will say that we just shared the presentation with the school committee just a few minutes ago. And Chris, if you want to put the presentation up on the website, it is available. It will be available on our main page, the presentation that's being shared here tonight. And we do have interpretation available on Zoom for families that need interpretation. Tomorrow we will share the presentation again out in the link, and we will also share hopefully the video of tonight's school committee meeting for people to watch. I think there's so much information here that we hope everybody will take the time to obviously listen tonight, but it's going to take some time to digest and read through the materials. I mean, I've learned a lot about the district in just the few. I've had a chance to look at some of the information in the last couple days, and even though I've been superintendent here for over 5 years, there's a lot that I learned that I did not know about the school district, and so I do think we're all going to get enlightened by a lot of information. There are no decisions here made tonight about our future. There's no vote going to be taken here tonight. It is just a lot of information and a series of scenarios that you'll hear from our consulting team for people to consider. And then I think the committee will talk about what the engagement will look like following this meeting. But we hope that you partner with us and really learn with all of us as we digest this information and decide on what the best course forward for the school district is. I will just say, I'll just say what we've said in the public meetings. We're a district that has a lot of really good things happening. I think we should all be proud of the work in the Salem Public Schools. We have awesome teachers. We have, more importantly, awesome kids, and we have families who are incredibly supportive. And I feel, fortunate to be here. We are faced with some fiscal challenges, not unlike a lot of districts in Massachusetts, but I think ours are pretty acute. And we want to exhaust all possibilities early enough in the year so we can make strategic and thoughtful decisions ahead of the budget cycle for the upcoming year and future years. So I'm pleased that we're doing this in, I guess it's just November, beginning of November, as opposed to having these conversations in March and April and May, where we all feel stretched and crunched to make thoughtful decisions. And so I do hope that this gives us enough time to be thoughtful and to have substantive conversations with our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dan Anderson and Dr. Sarah Foudy, who are going to share a presentation with you. Again, if you want to follow along, we didn't want to make 100 copies of 100 pages each, but you can look on the website. Chris, is it all set on there? Okay, so the presentation is available to the public, and we are ready to hear from our team here.
Hola y buenas tardes, miembros de la Comité Escolar. Gracias para la oportunidad de hacer este trabajo y de hablar aquí hoy. Como miembros de la comunidad de Salem, tenemos mucha gratitud para la chance de contribuir a nuestra ciudad y las escuelas. Venimos a Salem en 2020 para establecer nuestra familia aquí. Como padres con un hijo, estamos aquí para que él pueda aprender en las escuelas públicas de Salem. Ahora vamos a presentar en inglés, pero queremos decir gracias a la comunidad porque estas escuelas son tuyas.
Good evening, members of the school committee and the broader Salem Public Schools community. Thank you for the opportunity to conduct this work and to speak with you tonight. As members of the Salem community ourselves, we're very grateful for the chance to contribute to our city and its schools. We moved to Salem in 2020 and have since built our own family here and are excited for him to join Salem Public Schools as a witch in the future. While Dan opened our presentation this evening in Spanish, we are presenting in English for the rest of today. I wish we could do our introductions and presentations in all languages, but since we cannot, are grateful that the district is providing translation on Zoom for tonight's meeting. My name is Sarah Foudy, she, her pronouns, and I live with my husband and presenter here and our son in the South Salem neighborhood. My expertise is in school choice and assignment specifically, and research and evaluation in institutions related to racial equity more broadly. I've spent time as a classroom teacher in middle and high school in Philadelphia and out of school time settings and teaching in higher ed, and as an evaluator or consultant with nonprofits and other districts.
And I'm Dan Anderson, he, him pronouns. I come from experience as a high school administrator and a district administrator in Boston Public Schools, and then experience at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education before becoming a consultant. As we said a moment ago, we're working together and we're married with a young toddler who'll be a Salem student. We just want to say to the school committee as we get into the heart of this presentation, there's going to be a lot of information, as the superintendent said. So we welcome any clarifying questions so that you can feel like you understand anything that you want to before we move on in the facts. So our charge from you all was to evaluate possible scenarios and build a knowledge base for school committee decision making. What this has included is work to understand the impacts on students and families of any changes, developing a clear picture of how changes interact with family choices, identifying every area possible of Salem Public Schools that would be affected by elementary school changes, modeling financial impacts, and creating a roadmap for the school committee to come to an informed decision. At the request, we've left most community engagement to the school committee and the district, to you all, though we've enjoyed the opportunities that we've had to engage with students and others. So, why even consider reconfiguration? There's several factors that make this necessary, and we want to talk a little bit about them, building on what the superintendent shared. So, challenges. This is largely tied to funding. There are some difficult fiscal realities. Our enrollment is currently up compared to similar districts in particular in the state overall. It still varies from year to year, and it's hard to project. Local funding went up by 4.8% last year, and state funding through the Chapter 70 program went up by 4.7% last year, but is not keeping pace with inflation. Also, we had a large influx in every public school district of federal pandemic recovery funds, and those have now concluded. In addition, expenses are building. It costs more to provide level service. There's a 12% increase in overall district costs, as you've all heard through the budget process last year, and the cost of utilities are up 30% this year, which is fiscal year 26, compared to last year. We also want to make improvements to our buildings and lower our carbon footprint. This also yields higher electricity costs because you're doing more things with electricity as opposed to fossil fuels. And since electricity is getting more and more expensive as we make those improvements, that also will get more expensive. It costs dramatically more to make repairs or to purchase parts or facilities pieces than even a few years ago. Expenses are up through some of the estimates that we've seen by between 30 and 50% for capital facilities projects in some cases compared to before the pandemic. Trying to get the slide to go. Thanks, Mark. Last spring, Salem Public Schools had to close a $4.9 million deficit to reconcile the budget. Specifically, the district had to do this by conducting staff cuts. Since there's not that much outside of schools to cut, schools experience these reductions, as you can see. FTEs are a jargony term, full-time equivalent, which stands for roughly one person, full-time job. As costs continue to rise, financial stability is going to be harder and is going to require more attention. So you see that we've had cuts in each building, which totaled around 31 FTEs in the elementary schools. Without a decision on reconfiguration, every school will likely have more cuts like this and more significant cuts for the coming years. So every school would face more challenges to its programs and success. Reconfiguration will not cover all of the deficit for this year and future year, but it can help to stabilize the deficits and channel reductions in a way that mitigates them. We are not people who do reconfiguration. We're not here to do reconfiguration. We came here to build information and test the assumptions, and so we really wanted to test whether it is really necessary, and we've come to think that it is. Reconfiguration also can be more than just a response to challenges. So what we want it to be also is a chance to focus on core values like Salem's of belonging, equity, and opportunity, to work on moving our schools towards the conditions we want. If there's going to be a change, make those changes beneficial. So on the programming side, some of those things include sticking with a commitment to integrated and equity-driven schools, a commitment to growing early childhood citywide, valuing innovative models, all schools continuing to serve students with disabilities and multilingual learners. English language development or dual language program will continue to happen, one of those at each school in any scenario. And then students with IEPs are at all schools right now, and specialized programs are at all of the schools, substantially separate programs are at all of the schools except for Bentley. We also want to think about ways to consolidate resources and expertise to better serve students. So in other words, if there's going to be changes, how do we use those in a way that has resources coming together more for all of the students as opposed to spreading them out more? In the facilities, many of our elementary school buildings have room to grow. And you're going to hear us distinguish between schools and buildings a lot because we do not want to treat those things like they're the same. And when we're talking about buildings, we want to be clear when we're talking about buildings and not forget the people. So we can address some things on the facility side, including how much we're using the buildings and the wide variation in some of the things that they need. Sarah's going to get into some specific goals.
So we really want to ground this conversation not only in the financial realities, which are real and part of why we're here, a big part of why we're here. But we also want to talk about the values and what we're calling the North Stars of this project. We heard over and over again that if all possible, folks want us to have reconfigure options, get us closer to the district we want to have, rather than further away from that. So in our conversations with school committee members, district and community leaders, we began by listening to what you cared about most. And these are direct quotes from what you told us. You told us, I want to know that everyone is taken care of. I don't want another white kids versus brown kids like Bowditch. It's not who we are. Put kids at the center. Cost factor out, humane factor in. I want my vote to reflect a stance that is as equitable as possible. We need to feel confident that the money we are spending is in the best interest of kids. I want to know the impact on kids. From these conversations, in looking at the district's values, we put together these sort of 4 North Stars of this presentation to help think about the system that we want. Those 4 are equity, future-proofing, consolidating resources, and taking care of communities. On your own website, you say that equity is allocating resources so that those who need the most get the most. In terms of future-proofing, we care about flexibility for not if, but when enrollment and or conditions change, whether those be where kids live in our city, where housing even is in our city, and or climate change. Consolidate resources, adjusting those offerings, as Dan was alluding to best serve all students, and to take care of communities. Minimize disruption, displacement, and dispersal of students and staff when at all possible.
So we began our work by building out our understanding of various parts of the system, covering every aspect we could of the elementary schools. We visited schools. We conducted over 40 interviews with over 50 people, as Sarah shared, I think. Reviewed hundreds of pages of documents, assessments, plans, and spreadsheets. Researched best practices and current conditions. Reviewed transportation maps. Learned a little bit of GIS, and more. We saw more school boilers in a week than we had seen in our entire lives beforehand. The second one is not that interesting.
Second, shout out to Z watching at home.
Yes, our facilities director. So this research is culminating in a document that's our concrete fact base. We are constantly updating it with new data coming in as recently as this weekend, and then actually even a new update of data about half an hour before the meeting. And we are proud that this will be made available to the public. Along with the school committee and the district, as soon as we have a chance to finish updating it with that new data, our goal is that anything you hear tonight in our reasoning, you'd be able to follow our reasoning on it and to understand the underlying context by reviewing that fact base, which we expect to be shared, thanks to the district's assistance, next week. The areas that you see on the screen are some of the things that we delved into. The schools themselves, our current state, enrollment and family choices, the facilities master plan from a few years ago, facilities, building needs, transportation, the choice system, food services, staffing, climate resilience, early childhood partners and plans, multilingual programming, special education programming, out-of-school time programs and partners, innovation schools and plans, and some considerations for decision-making and more. Now we're going to turn to some of our overall findings, which are going to inform the specific scenarios and recommendations that you'll hear afterward. As you can imagine, no single scenario will be perfect or will meet all of our aspirations. They will reflect our North Star values. They will not reflect each of those values equally because they're all going to be challenging to put together. Our aim here is to give you a clear picture of what we collectively do and don't know, plus some crucial facts that determine what is and is not feasible, as well as the real choices and trade-offs that you're contending with so that you can confidently make a choice.
This first finding section presents you with some context findings and analysis related to the geographies of school choice, family choices, and transportation in Salem. On this slide, you will see, hopefully familiar, a map of Salem. The small buildings are the 6 elementary school sites. You'll see bolded black text, very small, but hopefully Zoom is winning at the presentation tonight. You'll see bolded black text roughly in the center of each neighborhood as defined by the city's GIS site. The blue boxes beneath the neighborhood show the values of all kindergarten registrants in each neighborhood over the past 3 registration sites. Registration cycles, excuse me. So the blue boxes are the total number of kindergarten registrants from the past 3 registration cycles. This slide is the same, except instead of raw numbers, you're now seeing the proportion of all the kids who registered over the last 3 years by neighborhood. So for example, where we live in South Salem, the previous slide showed 118 kindergartners as having registered from our neighborhood over the past 3 years. This chart shows that those 118 kids make up 16% of all families in Salem who have registered over the past 3 years for kindergarten. Those boxes now highlighted in yellow are the 5 largest registering neighborhoods by number of kids who did so. Now, it's likely not surprising for me to point out that not all neighborhoods are the same size or have the same number of kids registering. However, I want to point out that there are as many families who live in either the Point or South Salem as live in the combined 11 neighborhoods from Castle Hill to Mack Park to the entire downtown and northeast of the city. This distribution also matters because of where buildings are in relation to these neighborhoods. You'll see that Horace Mann, roughly in the middle of the map, is the only school, quote unquote, nearby 4 of the 5 top registration neighborhoods. Meanwhile, there are 3 to 4 schools, depending on how you count it, in the north and northeast part of the city. As we considered this mismatch of geography and school sites, we explicitly thought about the feasibility of our choice system versus a more neighborhood school model. Even before beginning this project, we had a lot of concerns, and we had heard a lot of concerns that we were, quote, spending a lot of money busing a lot of kids all over a small city. And yes, you do. Each school bus is roughly $100,000, so cutting that down could be meaningful savings. However, given the large number of kids in the southern part of the city, our quick estimate showed that at least 20% of all registering kindergartners in the last 3 years could not walk to any school given their current home addresses. This includes all of Vinnon Square, 42 kids, all but 4 kids in the Highland Ave neighborhood, 67 of the 71 kids, and 25% of kids in South Salem, about 30 of the 118 kids. So given the mismatch of where kids and buildings are, you're likely going to need to bus a lot of kids anyway. And given that 2 of your 6 main elementary options are innovation models, which would likely need to remain citywide options, it's unlikely that a neighborhood model would have the savings you'd want, and it would come at pretty steep trade-offs in terms of the equity values, which makes Salem truly unique in a positive way in this field. One last note here on geography and transportation. This is again a map of Salem, this time a bit zoomed in to show the commuter rail train tracks. The tracks essentially divide the city in half, and there are only 2 parts of the city where you can cross them. On Jefferson Avenue, down at the bottom, and in downtown Salem, where the 3 lines are up at the top, and Swampscott if you go further south. This infrastructure constraint is such that any elementary school of any size or reconfiguration would likely always need a minimum of 2 buses, one on the east side of the railroad and one on the right, so that kids are not on the bus too long, given your staggered start times and sharing of buses. When we looked at the data from the Welcome Centers on parent preferences and what potential walkers choose, I have here a comparison of 2 neighborhoods, North and South Salem. I'm comparing them because they have similar numbers of students and enough students to have a story we can meaningfully tell, but they make different choices. In North Salem, everyone in that neighborhood lives within a mile of Bates and therefore would be what we consider a walker. In this neighborhood, over 50% chose Bates as their first choice, but 15% never listed Bates as a choice at all. In South Salem, where only 75% of families could walk to Saltonstall, Horace Mann is also nearby. We see that reflected in their choices, where 24% of walkers chose Saltonstall, but that's tied with 24% choosing Horace Mann. Those two choices make up a similar percentage as the North Salem families who chose Bates, suggesting that about half of each neighborhood preferred a quote-unquote nearby school, even though it didn't necessarily mean they were a walker to that space. In South Salem, though, we see a difference where 34% of walkers are never listing Saltonstall as one of their first choices. I show this to emphasize that families are taking advantage of the choice system and are able to do so in the current model, even while preferencing their nearest school. But there isn't just choice variation in neighborhoods. Those preferences are also changing pretty dramatically over time. Here's an example from the Points neighborhood, from the Point neighborhood. I'm really sounding like I just moved here. Over the last 3 choice seasons. We suspect that as awareness and confidence in the Bentley program grew, something we heard from many interviews that was an intentional effort from the district over the past few years, so did the number and share of families who picked it as their first choice. Inversely, we see a decrease in the demand for their otherwise closest school, Saltonstall. Other changes are clear here too. Witchcraft, which is likely the furthest school from most families in the Point, also had a growth in popularity. We've heard anecdotally that this could be attributed to the need for busing to make school and work days work for some families, and this is the kind of information that would be particularly valuable to ask about in future community meetings. With these findings taken together, at this time, we are not recommending changes to the controlled choice model in Salem. This is for several reasons. With our North Star of equity, we found that families from most neighborhoods are utilizing the choice system and making a wide range of choices. Transportation, despite Salem's small footprint, will remain necessary for a minimum of 20% of students, given the city's generous transportation policy. Additionally, these areas include some of the city's largest low-income housing. We believe that creating a system without choice would also explicitly create a system of class and racial dynamics in Salem through busing, which we do not recommend and does not align with your values. For the time, because the choice system is now fully realized as designed, the balance within and across schools mean that this reconfiguration is not driven by hallmarks of segregated systems, by demographics, by performance, or even by teacher turnover, and that's something to celebrate here. We also believe that in terms of future-proofing, the uneven distribution of elementary school buildings in Salem relative to where kids live will remain an issue, irrespective of any decision you make tonight regarding, not tonight, any decision you make this fall regarding reconfiguration. Any innovation model would also likely need to remain a citywide choice, which is another piece of evidence to not recommend the change.
The next part of the puzzle is the buildings themselves. So we're going to talk a little bit about variations in size, space, conditions, and needs across the elementary school portfolio, which is such a jargony word. So we want to start with capacity and thinking about how many students can each of the buildings themselves support. And I'm saying buildings here. So there are, we examined different figures that have been generated either for the facilities master plan, a school facilities survey, or other sources, as well as floor plans and the building space and some conversations with school staff. Building utilization, which is to say how full is the building of students, is always very tricky because different educational programs host different numbers of students in their classrooms, because there's always great uses for space in schools. It's not bad uses for space, it's different uses for space, and we're thinking about all these things. For purposes of decision making, we have a model here that provides a range of estimated school current utilization of the school buildings. Again, that's how much of the school's possible number of students are there. The spread here in the rightmost column is determined by comparing the number of students in general and in special education classrooms, each with a minimum full amount of students and a maximum full amount of students, is what we're calling them. Maximum full reflects the cap in the collective bargaining agreement for the number of students that can be in the class, right? That is the highest you could go. Minimum full reflects filling classes to a critical mass that is lower than that, but is still a critical mass of students to collect them, to have classes be be able to collect resources in a way that's sufficient for all students' needs in the ideal, more of an ideal way. As you can see, all of our schools, by these measures, are underutilized. This does not mean that they can all add more classrooms, like a new third grade classroom, though many can. They can add more students in many cases, sometimes in many classes. There's significant space in the schools. Okay, so we wanted to look at a timeline of the facilities themselves, and we've color-coded this a little bit so that you can see over time some of the new builds, expansions, and renovations that some of the schools have experienced. We're not going to read through all of this chart, and I'm sorry that it's so small, but this is one of the reasons why we want everything in people's hands and everything to be publicly available. You're going to see, if you look closely, that all facilities have had major renovations since Bentley was built in 1962, except for Bentley. We're going to come back to that a little bit. Another factor that we heard a lot about in our startup to this project was folks speculating or concerned about anticipated issues about climate change, especially around flooding. So we've heard that concern, and we wanted to test it, take it seriously and test it. There have been assessments through other projects. We're not a climate resiliency firm, but we have seen the city, the district, the facilities master plan undertake work in this area. There are some concerns for some of the schools. So Bentley and Carleton, the buildings, and Salton Stall's outdoor area, they face an elevated risk of flooding in models from Massachusetts Coastal Flood Monitoring Program as they project out to the years 2050 and 2070. In particular, Bentley may take water as often as annually, and I don't mean for a year, I mean as often as once a year, there could be something with water coming in. Bates, Carleton, and Bentley face hurricane surge risk. This was discussed in the facilities master plan. The biggest issue is actually roadway flooding, which is going to be more frequent for you than building flooding. In many cases, the problem is going to be that roads get washed out. Many of us have, for example, driven on Bridge Street after a downpour and had to take a detour. Roads get washed out, which means that the buses wouldn't be able to get through on days where that kind of thing could be forecast. I don't know if that is going to mean that we have more rain days like we have snow days. In any case, the past reports all call for additional assessment and mitigation and the consideration of the locations. But it is not our understanding that these assessments called for relocation as necessary. So we believe that SPS should continue planning for mitigation with the city and with content experts around this, but we don't think that this precludes the use of any of the facilities, including the ones at the top of the slide. As we move toward our scenarios, we want to be clear that not all schools are in them. Specifically, Bates and Witchcraft, their general programs for K-5 are not in any of the scenarios of possible moves because they have consolidated resources already in a lot of cases where you are closest to the goals of full classes and buildings. They are largely future-proof in some ways. They are large buildings, and they have large populations already who would have to move, and there's still some room to grow if we needed them to. They are too big to move without dispersing the students, not all to the same place, but to multiple places, which is something that we'll talk a little bit about avoiding in a moment. So those aren't going to be schools that you see in the scenarios. We're going to differentiate as ITs between changes to buildings and changes to schools. Thinking about the options of what could occur. If you close a school, there are different possible outcomes. If you closed a school and dispersed all the students, there would be cuts in staff positions, but most of the staff would likely move to other schools. There would still also likely be annual cuts from the budget deficit. The building that the school is coming from that is closed would either move offline, which is to say not be used, or would it would be repurposed. If you merged schools, you'd have students integrated between two schools into a new school. Most of the staff would be integrated in the merger, although we want to be really honest that some administrators and other support staff would likely have positions cut during the merger. There would likely still be cuts annually. If you do a co-location, which is where you take a school and move it from one building to another building, and it is sharing that building as a full school with another full school, you'd have all the students moving together to a new site. Presumably, the staff would, generally speaking, all have the opportunity to move if it's a co-location and the school is just picking up and moving to another place. But and it wouldn't cut anything immediately, but then you would have more significant cuts every year in every building. The original building, again, could be closed or repurposed. You could also do nothing, which we would not recommend, because it would be likely that you have to have even more steep and significant cuts in every building every year. Again, we want to acknowledge the people, and there is a fiscal component to this. So mergers and closures do result in personnel savings, which is a way of saying that there would be some position reductions. If you had a merger or a closure, about 12.5 positions we estimate would be reduced. Those are not classroom positions. We do not know what the impact on classroom positions would be. The reason that is the case is because classroom position changes would be determined by once two schools come together or once students move to other places, you then see how many students you have in each school and how many sections you need in each grade, for example. And so that would then tell us how many classrooms we need. That was a little more than we can model out with the data that we had. This would affect administrative staff, some service providers, and other educational support staff. We want to talk about merging a school versus closing a building. The left scenario, it's not a question.
Oh.
Sorry, is it okay to pause for a
Yeah,
clarification?
absolutely.
On the previous slide, where it notes on the right-hand side, it says school co-locations would likely not result in most, if any, of these savings.
Yes.
Are you planning to go into that, or if not, can you clarify why that would be the case now?
Yes, that one's, I think, relatively straightforward. So it's if you take a co-location where two schools are sharing a building and they are both the full schools, then you're not changing any of your staffing because you still have, for the most part, it could be that there could be some shared positions, but generally speaking, you're not really changing the structures of either school, and so they still have the full staffs of the original schools that are now co-locating.
So under staff, when you say likely significant cuts to every building every year, you're not considering those, you're considering those akin to the do-nothing budget cuts that would take place as opposed to a savings from the co-location?
Right, because so the co-location in terms of staff positions wouldn't really save you anything. So they would still, just like everybody else, experience the cuts that would come from a budget deficit every year.
And so maybe it's just terminology. So for me, I view a merge as one student body from one place embeds themselves into one, and then as a result, there are decreases in staffing from having it. Co-locating, I would consider that to be two buildings, two school communities relocate, and that there would still be the merging of it. Are you viewing co-location as a shared campus, but no merging of the staff? Am I understanding that correctly then?
Yeah, that's the distinction we're making. A merger being you have two schools, they become one school. A co-location being you have two schools, they stay two schools, even though they're in the same building. That's a co-location.
So a merge could be I'm in this building and another student population is coming into this building, or it could be two different sites are merging into, i.e. a third building. Is that how you're defining merging? And then co-location is we've still kept all of our existing structures. We're operating as two fully separate buildings. Okay, thank you.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Thank you and we know we're bringing a lot of information and we're trying to move relatively swiftly. So thank you for stopping us. When you think about the difference between merging a school and closing a building, so again, the scenario on the left is about schools and it is specifically about a merger. We have what we told you about, the potential to save some funds by cutting some positions. You're not going to necessarily have any facility savings because if you do a merger, but the number of buildings stays the same, you're probably not saving any money on the buildings. Transportation will shift, and it may reduce the cost of transportation, but it may increase the cost of transportation in some of the situations that we've seen by about a bus. Closing a building So in other words, the schools aren't changing, they're moving, but you still have the same 7 entities. Closing a building and not a school, again, the transportation could shift because things would be moving. You have a number of factors that determine whether or not that is giving you any fiscal savings. So number one is the cost of operating that school as a school. So for example, paying your light bill every month. A second thing is the cost of mothballing a school if you're taking it offline but keeping it. Mothballing being effectively and safely taking the building out of service, but closing it up in a way that it's going to be stable and it's not going to become a health hazard or fall into further disrepair so that if you wanted to use it again, it wouldn't be in terrible shape. So if you're going to close the building and then keep it for later, you need to mothball it, which means you're still going to have some costs. They are dramatically different in things like utilities costs than if you kept it online, but there are some costs there. The other big difference is saving on the improvements that you would make to that building. So you have 2 kinds of dollars. There are a lot of kinds of dollars, but in particular, there are 2 kinds of dollars. There's your general budget, and then there's what's called the capital budget and capital funds. The facilities improvements, like big projects on buildings, like new windows or a new roof or a renovation, come out of capital dollars. They're a separate budget. It is shared with the city, but it's not the same district budget that you generally hear most of the attention on in the budget hearings. It is also limited. So if you took a building offline, because all buildings could use different improvements, that would mean that fewer buildings are sharing the limited capital budget. But you are not going to see any of the capital budgets represented in the figures that are on this slide.
Yep, Member Campbell.
Sorry, me again. I'm confused as to why merging a school doesn't have the same facilities impact as closing a school. 2 slides earlier, under merging, when it said building closed, moved offline, or repurposed. So if we're understanding merging as it could be we're relocating to one site or 2 are relocating to a third site, either way, it seems to me like there's a building that, again, could be pulled offline, could be repurposed, how are the savings not the same in both of those 2 scenarios?
Good.
So one of the reasons for that is in our scenarios, as we get to them, even when we are recommending mergers, we are not necessarily recommending pulling the building offline. There might be an option to repurpose it. So what you are sensing is us keeping the door open, that a change in our school configuration is not inherently a change in facilities, because that's a second decision within the same scenario.
Okay, so hypothetically, a merge could result in facility savings, but none of your recommended scenarios include that, so that's why it's not treated as savings. Like a merge could result in
A merge
any of the
could,
recommendations
a
that you're
merge
making
doesn't
now.
guarantee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We wanted you to see them split out so that you can also see them together, but like thinking of it as those 3 different things. Okay. We were a second ago talking about capital. So one of the biggest considerations, as I said, is if you close a building, you save on the money that you would spend to update that building. For each of the buildings, and this is based on a number of sources, including work from the facilities master plan, extensive work by the facilities department, and other sources to try to understand the needs and the current conditions of some things, but also the district's efforts, as I said, to move toward newer, greener technologies and things like HVAC. So this is an example of the needs in certain kinds of buildings. That doesn't mean that those systems are like not working right now. These systems are generally speaking in place in these buildings. This is a desire to upgrade, or systems have an expected life expectancy, and you generally have a refresh cycle where you work through these kind of components. We have an estimate of avoided capital expenses if one of those buildings, each of those buildings was to come offline. We want to be very clear that that is not a highly precise number for multiple reasons. These are largely based on, for example, when we have one estimate for one building, we don't have specific estimates for the same project from vendors for 6 buildings. And so they can't be exactly precise, but this is intended to give you a sense of scale. There are different scenarios that some of these things can happen, which is also why there is a range. This would all be on the capital budget, not the same operating general funds budget that determines things like staff, personnel, curriculum, those kind of things. It is a separate separate pot of money. This is intended to give you a look at how that would be stressed. And in the fact-based, we are going to have information also on what the recent capital budgets have been for the district, so you can get a sense of how long it would take to do some of these things. A few buildings have very specific considerations. There is a possibility that the district is investigating, that Bentley might have, I'm going to keep going. Okay, it's back. There's a possibility that Bentley would need to be vacated for it to get a full upgrade of its HVAC systems, which are the oldest and sort of the most out of date in terms of what is in place in the building. That would be a challenge. That's why the district is working to investigate that. Additionally, schools that have received funding from the Massachusetts School Building Authority for a project cannot be closed without consulting and likely repaying the agency for their prior contributions, which is a fun thing. So Bentley was approved for boilers in 2019. I do kind of get it. Bentley received new boilers in a project they applied for in 2019. I think they received the boilers in 2020. Bates is scheduled to get a new roof this summer. That hasn't happened yet, but it's about to happen. Saltonstall had a green improvements project, as did Collins, in 2012. We're not sure that would be a factor, but it is something that could be that we would want to make sure. Additionally, Saltonstall, there is something which, out of an abundance of caution, not an expectation of an issue, and in fact, recent facilities checks have suggested that this would not be a major issue, but out of an abundance of caution, the district has someone coming in to check something in the foundation, part of the foundation at Saltonstall. So these are considerations.
Member Campbell.
I'm so sorry. I always have a lot of questions on these things. Does
Please
that
don't apologize for questions. That's exactly
Careful what you wish for. All I need is to be emboldened. The MSBA funding, does that include if the building is repurposed for educational or a school-based thing, or even if you're still continuing to use it in a different way, it needs to be repaid?
Thank you for asking that. I should have said that more clearly. As long as you continue using the building for an educational purpose in the district, from pre-K to 12, you are still using it for what they funded you to use it for. It does not have to be the same school. Sorry.
So it would be buildings that have received it if the building is closed, not if the school is closed or relocated. Okay,
That's right.
thank you.
If hypothetically you had a building that had a project a couple years ago, the school could move, another program could come in, and it could still be used for that new program. Yes, thank you. I really appreciate you asking that question, because I meant to say that.
Thank you.
Dan, can I?
Yes.
I mean, this was a conversation we had with about when we were looking at 7 to 12 at Salem High School, because Collins had a recent, a renovation. That was going to be an issue if we chose to build a 7 to 12 at the Salem High School site and vacated Collins Middle School. The MSBA would have had a problem with that unless Collins remained a school in some capacity. You could have moved an elementary school here. That obviously is not happening now because we chose to build a high school at Salem High School and keep Collins as a middle school. But that is pretty consistent with the conversation we had with the MSBA when we were looking at the possibility of a 7 to 12.
Member Cruz?
Thank you. Can I just ask a question about the investigation of the question around vacating the Bentley for major upgrades? What is the timeline for that investigation to be completed?
Do you know the answer to that, Elizabeth? I know Z was.
I don't know the answer to that, but we're actively working to answer that question.
Okay.
I mean, and just on that, I mean, part of it is looking at what it would take to put in a cooling system, which they don't have cooling of any kind. Well, they have makeshift units that don't work very well. So part of it is like, that's part of when we say, I mean, they have old pneumatic heating system there, but on top of that is we would want to have cooling like every other building in Salem has other than Bentley.
If I might add, and also the opportunity to move to a heat pump-based system, which is more electrified, and again, gives you the opportunity to move off of fossil fuels in the future. Or in the short term, actually, not the future. Yeah.
Near future.
Yeah, near future. It is possible, though, that you could do a short-term thing at Bentley to enable another step and then a bigger project. That is something that you could consider potentially. Okay. Again, thinking about the costs of the costs, one of the things we thought about is estimating the 5-year cost of doing all these kinds of improvements in any of these facilities. And I want to say again, we're talking about the buildings here, not the schools. We're talking about the structures, the facilities, not anything about the people. So what you see is from the most expensive to the least expensive, the estimates about what it would be. That's in the middle column. On the right column is how it changes if you factor in funds that the district is already won through a competitive grant process or entitlement, or is pursuing in another, for example, a new round of the MSBA's project. So what you see is that Horace Mann, for example, which has a really high price tag overall to do all of the work that we'd like to do there, a lot of that would potentially be covered if the grants that so it's already been invited into the current round of the MSBA's accelerated repair program, and there's 2 other grants that the district has been working on that I think would support almost all of the rest of it. So that's something that could happen. That's happened in a number of places, and it could happen in the places that it hasn't happened. They would be just as eligible for those programs. And there is nothing in the needs that we saw that we think could not be addressed by in MSBA terms, an accelerated repair project as opposed to a full building. None of these are a tear down. They are all still solid and useful. Every single one of the buildings. The middle column is the same here. What's new is the far column where you think about the current enrollment in the school. And so you're dividing the cost to do the work of all of the capital facilities work that the district would want to do over the next coming years. As well as some operating. The cost to do all that per pupil with the current enrollment. And so one of the things that you see here is that the size of enrollment changes this chart a little bit. And the point that we're trying to make here is to show as you have people spread out in a lot of places, you're not necessarily concentrating resources for larger numbers of students, you're sort of spreading them out a little bit. But you can see how that affects individual schools. With all of this in mind.
Oh, Member Campbell.
Sorry. I'm not sorry. I'll take it back. What are you considering to be these estimated district costs? I'm thinking in particular how Saltonstall is listed on a prior slide for $250,000.
Yep.
As estimated capital avoidance, whatever, and then here it's 1.4 million. What's the difference between how those are calculated out?
It's the annual cost of times 5 plus that number. Then divided by enrollment.
And we picked it in the middle of the range.
And if it's a range, we picked the center of the range.
So then I get, sorry, go ahead.
Let's say, sorry. For this specific projection, I don't think we did this for others, to give you a sense, again, of the scale, we pegged it to the middle of the range for each one of the schools for this one, which is why it looks a little bit different.
And we're happy to check our math if this feels wonky and is wonky.
Yeah, it just seems that Saltonstall has the greatest discrepancy from estimated avoided capital expenses being at $250,000, tagged as needing a new PA/intercom, but no other major upgrades, to then needing 1.4 million across the. Unless I'm misunderstanding the capital versus, is this just facilities maintenance, to simply do the maintenance and doesn't include the capital upgrades?
I did say that it's just capital, and I misspoke. This is capital plus things like utilities operating that are building based.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with all of this in mind, the scenarios that we've modeled that we're going to share with you, we have considered and modeled school mergers or co-locations, not closures where the students are diffused to many, many different places. We have focused on mergers where at least most of the students get to move all together to a new place if they are going to move. As we said earlier, we want to take care of communities. We want to focus on the reality that you need cost savings And you want to avoid as many teaching reductions in particular, although reductions overall. And so co-locations, they're not always helpful, but we definitely considered them. Potential consolidations of programs that are similar. For example, if you have two substantially separate programs that use similar techniques, have similarities in their programming, have similarities in the resources that they need to use to operate, to serve students, we looked at scenarios where sometimes they came together. We also really wanted to look at scenarios where you have fewer half-empty buildings and a more balanced district. This does cost more money than closing and dispersing, because there would be more personnel reductions if you just closed buildings and dispersed everybody. That would give you a quote-unquote more efficient district in terms of the number of staff that you would need. But based on the values that we heard from you all in our individual conversations when we were asking for your input, and other factors that we've been talking about, and the district's values, we focused on mergers and co-locations, not closures with dispersing students all over the place. Okay. I'm going to say one more thing. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to reiterate that we will always include options to repurpose buildings if there is a move out of that building. So those will be modeled in these scenarios as well. We want to emphasize that there are no perfect solutions to this problem, but you can start to think about it in different ways. And when I say the problem, I just mean the district's situation of a difficult budget. You have all these buildings, they're not totally utilized. For a second, if this wasn't about people at all, and you were just thinking about a single factor, the size of the building, then sure, you would consider Carlton or Saltonstall. They're smaller, they can't hold as many students, they don't leave you as much flexibility. The condition of the building, you might consider Bates or Bentley or Horace Mann, which need probably the most facilities work. You might consider the current utilization, how full or empty the building is, which might make you think about Horace Mann or Saltonstall. If you're thinking about location, where the population is and where the students' geography are, you might think about Carlton, Bentley, Saltonstall. The point we're trying to make here is you are balancing a lot of different things. And we really don't want to be thinking about schools as, like these little cogs. And we want to say that it's complex. This isn't a blank slate for the students, families, and communities, but you can think about it as these different things that you are weighing so that you can try to do the best overall resulting district for the students.
All right. We know that any proposed change, irrespective of where deliberations and votes end up weeks from now, is going to weigh heavily on school communities, even if it's not ultimately decided on by the school community. Because of this, we're going to first explain the formatting of how we're presenting the scenarios very briefly. This is hopefully a chance to allow folks to navigate and compare scenarios and feel supportive for processing more information after maybe an hour of long information already. For each scenario, we have prepared 5 main slides that I will walk you through now. They are all available in the deck that is now on the district website for the public. Given how much information there is, though, tonight's goal of presenting our findings and recommendations, we're just going to narrate 2 of those 5 to you right now. We are happy and expect that other slides will come up in the Q&A and in future conversations, and we welcome that discussion. We are also going to be presenting 8 scenarios and ultimately put forward 4 of them for your consideration. Each scenario will be numbered. They are in no particular order. The numbers do not mean anything about their value or our decision. We will summarize the scenario and show you this branch of whether or not the vacated building should be closed or repurposed. The second slide, which will be at the end of this presentation for you to all access but not narrate out loud, are these detail areas. Every scenario will be modeled out in terms of the number of current students who would have to move. So any pre-K to 4th grader who would, if this change went into effect next fall, would be potentially changing sites. the school size of a merger or co-location, and the utilization rate of that building, as well as impacts or considerations for special education, school start times, early childhood, facilities, transportation, and a catch-all for other. I want to be clear that we did talk to and look at the impact of this on multilingual learners. We do not believe, given the current structure of programming in the district, that will be directly impacted by any of these scenarios, since they are served in all buildings. But I want to name that because it is not an area on any of these slides. The third slide that you can find in any scenario at the end of the deck is options for repurposing the building. We did model out some ideas and advantages and challenges of how you could potentially repurpose a vacated building should you want to go with that option. The fourth slide is financial implications, which will ultimately be, I'm sure, very important in your deliberations. That's also at the end of the deck, so that we don't all drown in nuance and numbers at this stage of the process. You will see it modeled out for at the top part of each table are the one-time savings, and the bottom part are the annual savings for either of those scenarios, closing the vacated building or repurposing it. The fifth slide, and one that we will narrate in any scenario, is our assessment of that scenario, whether or not we deem it worthy of your consideration as a voting body or not recommended, and why. Okay, finally, we are going to transition the scenarios themselves. There will be 8 scenarios. A reminder that we're only going to be presenting 2 slides per scenario, but all 5 are publicly available and at the end of the presentation and deck. Scenario 1. Saltonstall and Horace Mann schools merge at the Horace Mann building, with branching options to close Saltonstall's building or repurpose it. We do believe that scenario 1 is worthy of your consideration, particularly a version in which the Saltonstall building is repurposed rather than closed. Some strengths are that a school merger provides annual savings. With stable current condition and location among highest population areas, the Saltonstall building is a great location to use as a swing space, an early childhood space, or to have family welcome centers. Some concerns: there would be no savings from moving a building offline if you were to repurpose Saltonstall. And moving Saltonstall to Horace Mann would require 2 more buses, given their current locations as students, in order to get them there than they currently require going to Saltonstall. Some considerations: as the building needs the least work and is the lowest cost by enrollment and capacity projections, we argue that it would be better to use Saltonstall to improve or diversify the district's portfolio than to close and divest from the building.
The second scenario, Saltonstall and Horace Mann schools merge at the Horace Mann building, and the ECC co-locates at Horace Mann while Bentley moves to the Saltonstall building. I want to be very clear that we did prepare this slide also before learning about some of the details of the MSBA constraints. So we had considered that the 2 options were closing the Bentley ECC building or repurposing the Bentley ECC building. We suggest that you consider specifically a version of scenario 2 in which Horace Mann and Saltonstall merge and the Bentley or ECC building is repurposed rather than closed. The merger gives you some annual savings. It starts to fully maximize an otherwise pretty empty large building that you're already investing in. It preserves this larger elementary site at Horace Mann that's pretty centrally located. Concerns are that it might actually be too tight. Even with, and this would displace the Head Start Pathways program, which is a real factor, it might be tight even with that to have all of these schools co-locate, or excuse me, they're not co-locating, but all of these schools' populations at the same site. Some considerations you could intentionally then lower the amount of classes in the new incoming, the number of classrooms in the next incoming class to start to move it to a smaller, like 1 fewer strand school to free up some of the tightness of the space. We think you should consider this scenario.
In scenario 3, Carleton and Saltonstall schools merge at the Bentley ECC building, and Bentley moves to Saltonstall, and ECC co-locates at Horace Mann, with options to close the Carleton building or repurpose it. We do not recommend any version of this scenario. This moves a significant portion of the students in our schools. We estimated over 700 of your current 1,700 elementary school students. And it does not allow for repair at the Bentley site without multiple years of disruption at multiple schools. Some strengths, however, for you to know about: again, the annual savings from a merger, and merging two small communities near each other does make sense. Some concerns: any investment to get Bentley back online may require a year of swing space in the district, and this will also require 2 more buses on top of that.
Scenario 4, Carleton and Saltonstall merge at the Saltonstall building, with the Carleton building being either closed or repurposed. We suggest that you do consider this scenario. It merges 2 smaller schools, and you could create the preferred sort of 3-strand school, and merges schools whose special education programs have some related features. There are advantages to either closing the Carleton building from cost savings or repurposing it as a swing space, which is where you would have another group of students move to temporarily while you're doing some other facilities work, or if you have another program that requires space, such as the specialized secondary programs. Or repurposing it as an early childhood center. The school merger would provide annual savings. It would merge 2 smaller communities. The initial merger would be very tight, probably for the first 1 or 2 years at least, which could be alleviated if the school then phased from a 4-strand school to a 3-strand school by taking in sort of 1 fewer grade.
I have a question, Member Cornell.
I'm sorry, I just lost the thread of what 3-strand and 4-strand is.
A strand. Thank you. A strand is 1 classroom per grade. So it's a set of 1 classroom per grade in the school, like from either pre-K or K. In the case of the Salem schools, it's really more about K since the choice comes in for K. But, excuse me, K to 5. So a strand is those 6 classrooms. A K classroom, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5. And so what this is saying is Carleton and Saltonstall are more like 2 strands now. Putting them together, you would have a 4-strand school. That would be very tight in the Saltonstall building. You could keep that merged school, and then the next year you sort of phase out 1 strand, but you still have like 3-strand school with critical mass.
Member Cruz.
While we're, I know we just learned about the issue with the MSBA and then some of our facilities. Some of the mergers that you're proposing in the scenario involve schools that are innovation schools.
Yes.
And then some of them, so I'm wondering about that. What's the interplay there? And then additionally, as you go through the rest of the presentation, I think it'd just be helpful to understand, when you say merging at a particular location, so merging at, say, Horace Mann.
Yes.
Does the school then become Horace Mann, or are we making that decision based on the accountability data of the particular schools? Because my understanding is that when you close a school or merge a school, there's some implications on the accountability system. So just...
Yeah, it's a great question. Ultimately, it's your decision. So we were trying to be very clear that what we're talking about in each of these scenarios is a merger of 2 schools. Mm-hmm. We are not telling you what your resulting school name would be. In terms of the innovation schools, that's actually why we had the question here about which educational model will be used in the merged school. That's something that we had in mind there. I have actually done a lot of work on innovation schools. I helped set up a couple of innovation schools in Boston, and I can talk your ear off about that, but I don't think it's going to be super helpful. It's pretty intricate. There are options to do things like make changes to an innovation school. It is possible, especially when the innovation plan is coming up for renewal anyway. So you can move on from it, or you can keep it, and you can modify it. The innovation plan has a number of different autonomies in it. A school and a district together and a school committee together could work to make adjustments to that innovation plan so that some things stay the same and then some things shift. So there's a lot of scenarios. We are not and something we meant to say earlier that I neglected to say earlier is you will notice that we are not saying the word MCAS in this presentation because this is not an accountability or performance-based conversation in terms of the schools. Off the cuff, I would say I believe that when two schools are merged, they don't pick the accountability status of one of the two schools. They actually take the testing and accountability information for all the students who are now students in the new school, and they generate a new accountability status. So we could also get into the weeds on that, and we could certainly ask for confirmation. I think I just threw a lot at you. I'm not sure
That's
if I answered
super
your
helpful. I
question.
think the last time that we were having conversations around school closure, it was a question that was raised. I think I raised it during the committee meeting, but then I also raised it, members of the public were raising it as well. So just, I think it's helpful for everybody to have that same level of information, but we don't have to get into the weeds.
Yeah.
We can talk another time.
Thank you.
Scenario 5. Carlton and Horace Mann merge at the Horace Mann building with options to either close Carlton or repurpose it. We do recommend Scenario 5 to the committee as worthy of consideration. This merges two small schools, and there are advantages to either closing Carlton as a building in terms of the cost savings or repurposing it as swing space or an early childhood center. You will notice that as we get into later scenarios, there is overlap on these slides of what are the advantages and challenges. Some concerns that we do want to name is that there might not be room at Horace Mann for the Pathways Head Start program to stay or for the ECC to join if they were to do that. There's certainly not room for both unless adjustments were made to future kindergarten enrollment or substantially separate program placement. This would also likely add 2 more buses in order to have these schools together. We also want to be clear that the special education programs that would be brought together by these two schools coming together are not entirely similar, although there is definitely room to support both in that space. Again, the question, given the innovation plan at Carlton, how does that impact the educational model in the merged school?
Scenario 6, Bentley moves to co-locate in Horace Mann and ECC remains or moves. Again, I just want to say, this was before we made this before we had some of that information about MSBA, so that should be taken into account. But we do not recommend this scenario anyway, any version of it. The ECC would either stay, which would likely be disrupted by building improvements the way that this scenario would work, or move, which is sort of impossible at any district site unless you displace something else, like, for example, a substantially separate program in another school. And there's not substantial cost savings anyway. And it would displace the Head Start program at Horace Mann. And the co-location would provide limited cost savings anyway and could increase your transportation costs. We do not recommend this scenario.
Scenario 7, Bentley moves to Horace Mann, and Horace Mann moves to merge with Salt and Stall at Salt and Stall's building, with closing the Bentley building, which now we have more information about, or the Bentley ECC building being repurposed. We do not recommend any version of this scenario. The students from Horace Mann and Salt and Stall would not all fit at the Salt and Stall site. Additionally, the ECC would not really have a home as a result if Bentley were to be closed, or even if it had to be vacated for necessary improvements with this change.
Scenario 8 has 2 branches. So it's Bentley moving to the Carlton building, Carlton moving to merge with either Salt and Stall or Horace Mann at their current buildings, and the ECC moving to Horace Mann. This is the same as either 4 or 5, with the addition of Bentley moving to the Carlton building. We do not recommend this scenario. It requires significant movement of a large number of students. It would hamper your opportunity to, in the future, grow either ECC programming or Bentley programming. You would have the annual savings of a merger. You would have 2 of the smaller schools coming together into a larger school. You would have facility savings most likely. Well, actually, sorry, that one doesn't matter anymore in terms of facility savings, because if you take Bentley offline, you're paying it back. And then in terms of concerns, Bentley would also not be able to grow at Carlton, and it's not that we specifically need Bentley to grow, but as you're thinking about future proofing, you're trying to leave room for different things that could happen. Also losing the Bentley building is losing one of the largest buildings that has the most capacity. Moving the ECC or Carlton to Horace Mann would displace the Head Start program, and ECC would not be able to grow unless additional changes are made. Scenarios 4 and 5 are a lot simpler, and they involve a little less moving. This also may have additional bus costs.
That was a lot. I just want to honor that was a lot, and thank you to everyone here and those at home hanging with us through, I'm sure, dinner and bedtimes and your evenings for a very long meeting. Now that we presented all the scenarios, we want to reground in those North Stars that we started with to inform how we created and evaluate the scenarios. So in building the system we want, just want to restate that we focused on equity, on future-proofing, on consolidating resources, and taking care of communities. And as Dan said earlier, there are no perfect solutions to this complex problem. If there was, we would have presented that to you tonight. There is no one school change that would fix the challenges with finances, buildings, and equity. And even if there was, there is no change that would be possible without impacting our students, families, and communities.
So to recap, excuse me. In summary, we identified 4 scenarios that we would consider particularly worthy of your consideration. Scenario 1, Salt and Stall and Horace Mann merging at the Horace Mann building, with the Salt and Stall building ideally being repurposed. Scenario 2, Salt and Stall and Horace Mann merge at the Horace Mann building, and Bentley moving to the Salt and Stall building, with the ECC Bentley building being repurposed likely as an early childhood center. Scenario 4, Carlton and Salt and Stall schools merging at the Salt and Stall building, with the Carlton building going offline or perhaps becoming an early childhood center. And Scenario 5, Carlton and Horace Mann merging at the Horace Mann building, with the Carlton building offline or becoming an early childhood center. The school committee may have additional ideas that we have either not tested or necessarily haven't quite gotten into, or ideas that we hadn't thought possible that might be. You also might have more questions or considerations than we had considered. We certainly want to leave room for there being things that we didn't think of. We're really, really eager to support this work, both for the community. We also really want to acknowledge that these are schools with children and educators who are our favorite people in the entire world. This is incredibly challenging, I'm sure, to see the name of your school on something like a major change suggestion like this, and we're talking about it sort of dryly. We really appreciate everyone's going with us to try to understand everything that's behind this thinking. One outstanding question is immediate, which some of you, I think, have already anticipated. We recommend that you immediately continue to investigate whether Bentley would have to be vacant for upgrades, because I think we think that has a lot of implications for any of the choices that you would make. Additionally, we would recommend the following to the committee and the district. Consider the possibility of phased renovations options and school moves. So, for example, you could have ECC or Bentley, not both, potentially stay in the Bentley building and possibly have renovations happening in one part of the building while the other part is being used, and then flip to renovate the other part of the building. We are not sure that that's possible for some of the projects that need to happen, but we suggest exploring ideas like that, especially if they can help with upheaval. Also considering phased school growth or right sizing. So this is where we started to get into the Strands jargon, but thinking about using things over time to shift. So phasing out or phasing in a K-5 set of classrooms in a particular area so that the entire district so that the school and the system isn't having an immediate larger shock. There's time to gradually make that change. Protect space and continue investing in the highest needs students. For example, if we saw some data that made us think that it's possible you might actually need to start setting up more space at the therapeutic program at Bates. If that's the case, and we're saying if, consider what you could do that would enable you to have more space for that kind of a program. Or specialty programming that you want to have, like one of the innovations, or your pre-K offerings, and you just had the pre-K strategic plan, which is a great roadmap, come out, that we would certainly want the work here to dovetail with that work. And finally, consider this as an opportunity to recommit to valued and high quality partners. There are several partners in the district who do out of school time programs, who provide other programs, who provide pre-K programs. You've heard me mention the Head Start program at Horace Mann a number of times. when we have programs who are doing high quality work, we want to see what opportunities we have to work with them. We know that we've given you a lot of information, as Sarah said, and there's more coming to you with the full fact base that we've mentioned that we will be bringing to you, and we're very excited that this will also be going to the community as well. We want to reiterate here that we recommend action right now at this time. We don't mean today, but in this conversation in the next coming weeks at this time for a few reasons. First, December is actually a really good time to make and confirm decisions in a lot of ways. For families and students, it gives them some time to plan for the future if a change is going to happen to their school. They'll know about it in advance. Also, for our families who are going to be registering for school, which we are really thinking about, this would happen before you launch that process. So you wouldn't have families start that registration process and then their choices change. For school communities, obviously changes like this are challenging. We're not trying to minimize that, but we want them to have time to process and prepare as a community. And for teachers and staff, there's implications here as well, in particular where we start to talk about position cuts. And any staff who'd be affected by a change to their school should know that change with as much time to plan for the next year as possible, hopefully in a Salem school. And the hiring season, this would give an opportunity at least to be out ahead of that. For the system, it's imperative to decide any reconfiguration changes before you start to do things like the budget process. I don't know how you could do a budget process without knowing what your decision would be here. And we also want to share something that we've heard in this process during all these conversations, which is that we were actually worried at first about the timeline being too fast. And a big part of that had to do with the choice process and families. And so making sure that this wasn't happening after that started. But in general, we were thinking about that. And thanks for our conversations with educators and leaders and administrators and other folks and our collective bargaining partners, we've actually been convinced to change our minds about that a change next year would be doable. And we've heard from a lot of you that once a decision's made, a time frame of about half a year is the right time frame. Because making a major change to a school community much further in advance of that creates a really drawn out period of time, which can be difficult for the community. And as I said, that really changed our minds. With that in mind, we have some recommendations for the committee on process, and we are nearing our conclusion. So there's a 7-week period for you to use before the new year. It's more than 7 weeks, but I'm not counting the winter break period. We humbly and hopefully not presumptuously suggest that the committee discuss and decide tonight when to add community meetings to the schedule to make sure that you are building in those. I'm not going to read you through this whole table, but we've laid out each of the weeks and some suggested activities that we think could be helpful in terms of making a decision. We want to help you make a swift and methodical decision in this process that we think is really necessary for families, students, educators, and the school communities. And Sarah is going to close us up.
The district has created an email address for public input, which you can see on the slide, reconfiguration@salemk12.org. We will be supporting them in answering questions and gathering additional data and analyses as needed, and we'll let them explain more if there's anything I'm leaving out with this. But if not, we will wrap up here. Thank you for the chance to do this work and for all of your time and attention today in raising our kids and our communities. We look forward to answering any questions that you may have here and in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for that presentation. And I appreciate if school committee members, my apologies for that. If school committee members have questions now, or if you want more time, we did receive this presentation this evening for the first time, so I think people may want to have some time to digest it and follow up with questions individually, but we'll take questions now if there are any. Member Cruz?
Thank you, Mayor. And I think it was a wise choice for us to process this information at the same time as the public. So just appreciate Sarah and Dan, the work that you did here and the engagement that's happened thus far. I think it is the recommended approaches. It feels truncated, but these are conversations that have been going on for more than a few years. I think if there was a few places that I would say I would want the public to be operating with the same level of information that the committee has within the presentation, I saw a few of them. I think where you note what the budget deficit was in the previous year, I think we've talked about at this committee level different projections. I know that they're not exact about the budget deficit we're facing in the upcoming budget and then the following one. But I've had a lot of members of the public who are like, why is it that we keep talking about a fiscal consideration? Wasn't there just a major series of cuts that happened in the last budget cycle? So I just think giving the public within the presentation, which I'm sure a lot of folks are going to digest, the opportunity to understand that this committee is grappling with anywhere between $15 to $20 million over a couple of years. I think that lays out transparently, like that is a real fiscal challenge that we're facing. So if we could include that in that particular section, I think that's helpful. The other place where I thought it would be important to note is on the conversation around school choice. I think it would be important for the public to understand that within the policy itself, we're required to re-examine that policy every 3 years. So if we could include the reference to the policy, just so that, again, members of the public understand that we have taken a look at the policy every couple of years. We do the review, but that we're required to have that level of community engagement, and we've done that in the past. And so I just think from a transparency standpoint, again, people operating on the same set of facts, this is a committee that operates with fidelity to those policies. So I just think that'll be a helpful kind of note for folks that want to do some further digging about why we were even having that conversation in the first place. Just with respect to like what I saw in the recommendations, this is more towards my colleagues and the superintendent. I think this is a committee that's going to be in transition very soon. And we have folks that are experienced right now, and for the new members, quite frankly, they're going to be drinking out of a firing hose. So I agree with the sentiment that we probably need to make this decision before the end of the school year, and that, again, might feel quick for some folks, but I do believe in giving our families, educators, and students the clarity that they deserve, because we've talked about the challenges that we're facing as a system as being something that we need everybody engaged in, and it's going to feel like a really intense period, but it's absolutely the right kind of timeline for folks. And so I would just ask that we have public hearings regarding kind of the presentation, the research that'll come out, whatever we're lining up fiscally, and that we actually think about the ways in which these meetings could be more accessible if we have public hearings by moving the location of the actual school committee meeting itself. I just think as we're talking about particular communities, not everyone can get to Collins Middle School. So I just think, to the extent that we can be in other places, I know committee members, I want to thank everybody who made the rounds at the various conversations that led up to this point. But I do think having our meetings in different locations will allow particular school communities to feel more comfortable coming forward, just given that, again, context and proximity, people may not be as familiar with this building, but they are with other buildings that are within the district that are listed within the recommendations. And then I would just like to put a plug in, I think Sarah and Dan, you did a great job of just elevating that we have really vulnerable folks that are in our district. So as we just think about like who can be the folks that are the bridge builders, LPAC, CPAC, and others that, again, represent, I think, the more vulnerable students and the parents within this district, I think we just need to talk to them about how they want to be engaged within this process in the 7 weeks that have been laid out in the packet. That's it for me.
All right, thanks. Member Cornell?
I just want to say thank you. That was what I was hoping for. I was, and I think probably even more detail than I was expecting. So that was really great. I really appreciate your expertise and the thoughtfulness with which you kind of you engaged with and ultimately understand the community that we live in and what our values are, particularly around equity. I really want to thank everyone who came tonight and everybody who is listening online. It's, we've been really kind of overwhelmed and impressed with how many people have shown up for the individual school discussions. We've had 30 to 40, sometimes 50, I think, people at those meetings, people asking really great questions. So I think I can speak for my colleagues when I say that community engagement and community feedback is incredibly important for us. So if there's something I think that if we're missing some avenue of communication, please reach out to Dr. Zreich or any one of us. Our email addresses are available on the city website. I think we're all very accessible. If you email us, we'll give you our phone number. You can call us, talk to us about your concerns, ideas that you have that Sarah and Dan haven't haven't thought of or we haven't thought of. The last thing I also want to say, because it might seem strange that we have all these options that they came up with that they're not recommending, those are actually super valuable for us as a school committee because we've been having this conversation for 4 years. We have kind of thrown around a variety of scenarios, some of which just don't work very well. And so it was good for me at least to hear, like, this idea that you had is actually not awesome. So I just want folks understand like why we have all of these rejected, or not recommended ideas, because we were like, how about this? So that was really helpful for me to hear. And 4 is actually a number I can wrap my head around. So thank you very much.
I have them.
Yeah, okay. Member Campbell.
Hi, thank you. Okay, I have a couple, I think mostly requests for additional information. I'm not sure who that would come from or where it would come from, and then a couple of questions. My first is, I believe at the beginning of your presentation, you referenced having additional materials next week. I just want to make sure I understand and that the public understands what those will be and what people can expect to have to look through next week.
Sure. It's currently over 100 slides, and that was so that we are not here till next October tonight. But because we've pulled so much information, including looking at all the bargaining agreements and links to those things, pulling the DESE policy on transportation and the links to those, as we've been finding all of these meaningful breadcrumbs and doing analyses and comparing, we want to make that really transparent and available so that if we miss something or misspoke or miscalculated, it's transparent and that can be part of the process. We, knock on wood, didn't, but we're also human. And so want to honor that this whole thing needs to be available so that it's not a behind closed doors assumptions that got us to these 8 scenarios or to our final recommendation. So the slides are, for example, the one I shared about the maps that I showed. There are maps to show you which neighborhoods had each school as their first or second, had the most kids as they're choosing it for their first choice, or second most kids choosing it as their first choice, or never chose it. So a lot of different ways to think about the choice data, a lot of different ways to calculate facilities or estimate facilities or calculate different ideas of costs over time and different interest rates. There's a lot, and it's going to be overwhelming, and I want it. Sorry, I was going to invite you in, and then I just boxed you out. Love you. So there's, I wish that would be as accessible as I hope tonight's presentation was, and I want to say that it's going to just be a information dump in the spirit of transparency. We welcome questions, follow-ups, and folks want to engage with it. We're here to help do that. But there is not time for us to package it the way we did tonight and get it to you so that you have it for important conversations and decision-making. So that's a known trade-off that we're making.
Perfect, thanks. Because actually what you referenced is specifically one of the things I was looking to get, which was more specificity in regards to, like, if not opting for their closest school, are there patterns and trends where they are choosing to list as first, second, or third? And in that, I would also really hope to see, I know that it's easy to bucket South Salem as the neighborhood of South Salem, but especially given the train track conflagrated, that's a whole thing with the transportation, it would be really helpful to be able to see, because for some of them, like South Salem, are so close to Saltonstall, some even closer than students in the Point, and for others in South Salem, Saltonstall is very much not their closest neighborhood school. And so, for example, when you talked about, I think it was 34% of students not ever selecting Saltonstall, does that encompass all 25% that are not within 1 mile of Saltonstall? Like, in other words, if you are within that 25% of students for whom Saltonstall is not your 1 mile proximity school, are those the students that are not selecting Saltonstall at all? Or is it really that there are a lot of students who are quite close to Saltonstall who are not choosing Saltonstall, if that makes sense?
I can say anecdotally, I created sort of a neighborhood variable and then looked up every address of every kid from the last 3 years who registered for kindergarten to map them onto those neighborhoods. And there were kids who were across the street from multiple schools. I don't want to be singling out Saltonstall here. There were kids within a mile, within a half mile, within a street of many of these schools who did not choose it as their first choice, and that's consistent across the district, and that's why I sort of zoomed out, because we're dealing with such small neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. it's a little tricky to make sure that we're really protecting students and families and where they live in some of these small neighborhoods to say where their choices are, because they might be in those schools now. And so I'll have to sort of think about that. But these are the questions I love.
Even if it's just sort of like roughly from this area, these are the general, like if there is a trend or pattern, like I'm making this up off the top of my head, but actually you referenced it, that in the point there is an increasing number of students.
I
who
can
are
do that
choosing
by
witchcraft
neighborhood,
types.
for
Like
sure.
That type of thing, that's sort of what I'm looking for. And then for South Salem, the geographic split, I think is just really hard for me to wrap my mind around, given how geographically large it is and the number of children that are there, to really be able to see like what patterns might emerge from there. And then similarly, I appreciate and understand your conclusion in regards to how school choice is working for kindergarten. Where I have my most significant concerns are in the non-kindergarten grades, and in particular, I think anecdotally, third and up. What I'm really concerned about is, do they have access to schools, or are many seats already filled up for these students because of our controlled choice policy? And so, for example, if families are moving in with third graders, or let's say a second grader and a fifth grader, are they automatically really limited because they're looking for where is there a slot in second and fifth grade available? And so that, for me, where my biggest concern regarding school choice comes from is I worry that we are artificially limiting new arrivals to Salem, and then by default often are immigrant families, and many of whom, again, anecdotally, would love to go to their neighborhood school, would love to be able to walk, like that. I hear that a lot. But there may not be seats there, and there often is like, well, why am I going to the school all the way across the way? And then because of our mandatory rider policy, new arrivals to the country are automatically mandatory. That's my biggest concern, is it working for kindergarten? Because I think by and large it does seem to work for kindergarten. We've seen that again and again and again, thanks to Jill Conrad's wonderful presentations over the years. But like, what does it look like for non-kindergarten students in particular?
Totally hear you. I want to clarify one thing in terms of the data that I used, because I was looking at their choice preferences, not their enrollment. I still think it does tell us about what they want without telling us where I'm not, in none of the slides that I speak to, where kids ended up. It was just where parents picked as their first, second, or third choices, and it was all year round. I did not just look at on time or first round registration. So I just want to clarify that piece, that I think it'll tell a little bit bigger of a story than it might have suggested tonight, and that doesn't speak to where they end up, which we know does structure access the way you're speaking to it.
I do know, again, from Jill's presentations many a time, most families are receiving their first or second choice, so that is for the most part where they have landed. And I just don't know that. I would like to know if our upper grade students are receiving the same level of choice as we would hope given our policy. And then, sorry, I have two more for now. The first is about dual language. I would love to know, and this might be more a question for Steve, do we have an idea of what the level of interest is in dual language? I think that's a really important consideration in terms of like facility space. If it's, we see a lot of interest that could easily outpace the room that's available in the Bentley School, for example. Is there a consideration for being able to add additional strands into it in such a popular model? Or have we sort of, based on our information, have we kind of do we have the right size program for the level of interest? And I think that would be really helpful as well. And then my last question, this is more just like a small one. The current percentage of mandatory riders on the bus, I know you referenced at least 20%, we would still need to have a bus for it. What is our current percentage of students who are mandatory riders now? Do we know?
We have calculated it by school, so we could add that up for you.
Okay, because if it's similar to that calculation, I would agree with it. But if it's significantly higher, that is still a swing, like if we're looking at a much higher percentage of mandatory riders. And then I thought I heard you say when you talked about, I think it was the point and the number of students going to Witchcraft Heights, was there a comment around it perhaps being used because the extended hours of the busing helped kind of elongate the day, or did I misinterpret what was said?
That's what I've heard and what
Okay.
folks have said anecdotally, but I wasn't looking at any data that could prove or disprove that.
Okay, thanks. It just made me think in terms of like on our other school committee hats that we wear, increasing access to extended day programming and what that might do for families. That's it for now. Thank you.
Any other questions at the moment? So I want to say first, thank you both. We're very fortunate that you were able to help us with this project to this point, and also that you are Salem residents yourself. We're just really grateful. And just to reiterate for the community, I think a point that you mentioned during the presentation, which is this is not a performance-based or accountability-based process. So we've had 7 preliminary meetings with elementary school communities. About 400 people have attended those. And if you've had the opportunity to participate in one of those presentations, I think it was very clear from Dr. Zreich's presentation and the school committee member who attended that this is based really around the facilities and the financial constraints the district is facing right now. With that being said, we do have more process ahead of us. And in following up on the time frame that you outlined in the presentation, I wanted to propose some dates for the community feedback sessions that are outlined, specifically looking at Monday, November 17th, and Tuesday, November 25th. The 17th at 5 p.m., preceding our school committee meeting, and the 25th, I think we said 6:30 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting head shakes.
I'm sorry, what's the second date?
The 25th. And in terms of locations, since in the 4 recommended scenarios, Salton Salt, Carlton, and Horace Mann are the 3 schools that seem to be the most impacted amongst the 4 scenarios, I would suggest 2 of those 3 schools. Yeah, Member Cornell.
I mean, think Salts makes sense because it's centrally located, and I think Horace Mann makes sense because it's, when we look at that map of how many kids are in that area, I think that also makes sense. And the buildings can accommodate a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
except Bentley has a lot of parking, so
It's walkable for me, so.
she can walk there.
It's not all about you, Member Campbell. Okay. We will confirm those dates and times and share them with the community. So I would suggest that for the November 17th listening session or community feedback session, that we also hold the school committee meeting at that location immediately following the public information session. And for the public, the format for these meetings will consist of a abbreviated version of the presentation, really highlighting, I think, the scenarios that are under recommendation, and then allowing time for public questions, dialogue, or comment if there isn't a question specifically. The email address that was shared previously is also available to provide written feedback on the scenarios that were presented, and as has been mentioned, this presentation is on the district's website. Member Campbell?
Will questions that come into the reconfiguration email, will those be posted publicly? I know we've done that for budgets in the past.
Yeah, we can do that. It's coming to me and a couple of other people, so we can post whatever questions we get ahead of time, and I can share it with the committee as well.
Or even, I mean, the questions, and then, like, if there's
the
an
answers.
answer provided, I think that would be
Yeah.
like almost like an FAQ, kind of.
I've already gotten a question, so we'll.
Somebody here.
And I already responded, so we.
How about that?
I can tell you I can tell the public what the question was just about when we talk about an early childhood center, what grade levels were we referring to? And I think you were referring to preschool and pre-kindergarten, not kindergarten, right, Dan? I just want to.
Yes, generally speaking, the way we modeled the scenarios, the one that was coming out was, excuse me, not including kindergarten.
Not including kindergarten.
Particularly because students choice in at kindergarten, you don't want to introduce more changes.
So now you said that, and people are going to start emailing you, and you're
Yeah,
going to
well,
have to check it right now.
I'll have to. I'll send it. I'll send the email.
Facebook
to you,
Live
Mayor.
with Dr. Zreich. Well, if you submit a question to that email address, we can post the responses and the questions, removing the information about who asked the question, of course. But if somebody wishes to ask a question and not have it posted, please specify that as well, because we want people to be able to feel comfortable asking whatever questions they have. Member Cruz.
I'd just make one more ask as we're considering what we're going to publish around the schedule here. I think we do need to involve our community in the broader push that we're having around the funding formula. I know that the superintendent recently attended one of the public sessions that the state is holding regarding the funding formula, but the day after the scheduled school committee meeting on the 17th. So on November 18th, there's going to be a virtual public comment period regarding the Chapter 70 formula. We really do need folks in Salem to be raising up their voices. We did commit in the state budget to re-examining this through a commission, but I just think that the pressure does need to mount from communities like Salem regarding just how uneven the treatment of a lot of communities that are similarly situated to Salem has been by the Chapter 70 formula. So to the extent that we can publicize that alongside of this information, Dr. Streich, I was going to wait till announcements for it, but just figured I'd put a plug in for it now.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So that concludes the presentation on the reconfiguration study. We will take a brief pause unless people would really like to stay for the subcommittee reports.
Motion for a 2-minute
yeah.
recess.
Hold on a second.
Can I just say one thing before we close? The plan is tomorrow to send out a communication to the community with all this information that we have and clarify the dates of the different sessions so people know where they are, when they are. So please look out for that. It might be the end of the day tomorrow, so after we finalize all of that. We didn't want to have any of those things finalized until after the presentation tonight, but we will get you all that so you have that, and people will know. We want to give people ample notice to for the hearings. I think it also gives enough time for people to digest both this presentation and then by early next week all the facts will be out there. What are you calling it? Your fact base. Fact base will be out there for people to have at least a week to look at it before the first public hearing. So just wanted to say that before we close this part of it.
Make a motion for a 2-minute recess.
I'll second.
Motion for a 10-minute recess.
2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes. Jeez, I was going to say 10 minutes. Wow. There's a lot of people. It takes a long time. 2 minutes. All in favor? Recess.
We have the MSBA update in your packet. There's not a lot of additional information that's new from the last meeting. We do have a building committee meeting on Thursday evening here at Collins. We're still working on the final design for the building for submission to the MSBA in December, but I don't really have any additional information to share. I do, just before I close, and I think, Elizabeth, you have an update too. I also would just say, going back to the last topic, is I am more than interested in going to speak to different parent groups at the different schools. We know that for all our families, like, these meetings don't always work. I know that not every family goes to every PTO meeting or every Zoom meeting that we shared. But we have other groups that meet. We have members of our parent advisory group here. But if there are specific groups in the community that want to hear more about the elementary reconfiguration plans, I look forward to attending those. We'll go out at any point to talk to the different communities that want to ask questions so that we inform as many people, not just the people that were here tonight or watching on Zoom. Elizabeth, I don't know if you have anything on your update that you wanted to share.
I do. I have 2 updates. The first is about athletic coaching stipends, which is right after the MSBA memo in the packet. So the school committee and the STU agreed to review and recommend new stipends for athletics coaches. They have not had a raise in some long time, and they are among the lowest paid, have been among the lowest paid athletics coaches in our league. And so a subcommittee of the athletics department and members of the STU leadership team came together to recommend stipends, met with the policy subcommittee of this group, met with me, and what we bring to you today for your consideration and approval is a set of stipends that will, over the course of this year and next year, increase the stipends for athletics coaches so that they are in the middle of the pay scale for our league. It also this language also includes an opportunity for coaches whose teams go on to postseason play, so they qualify for postseason play, to have access to a pool of funds that will compensate them for the extra time that this extended season would result, or the demands it would place on their time. I will say that this recommendation for FY26 aligns with what we have budgeted for FY26. So we have found a way to raise those salaries over 2 years. And so I'm bringing this to you for your consideration and approval. And I don't know if members of the policy subcommittee want to add anything to what I've said.
Member Cruz.
I would just clarify that although the membership is the same, the personnel subcommittee.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Even though everything does get sent to policy these days, it was the personnel subcommittee. No worries at all.
Apologies.
So I would just add that I think this was one of the outstanding items from our conversations with bargaining. I just want to extend my thanks to our friends at the STU, the district leadership, for coming together to work on a recommendation that I think was prudent and also aligned with the agreement that we made with the STU last year. So I think that what we're seeing here is an opportunity for us to be able to retain the really great coaches that we have and to ensure that we're compensating folks fairly for the time that they spend with our student athletes. So just want to express my gratitude to folks. It took a lot of work to get here as we were exploring a couple of different scenarios, but I just think it's a prudent way to tackle the issue. And I'm excited that we're going to be able to offer these coaches who have dedicated just so much time to our children these additional forms of compensation.
My second update, and apologies again for the personnel subcommittee, my second update involves the Buildings and Grounds subcommittee. We, at the last school committee meeting, we brought to the full committee a renewal request for the license for Angela's Daycare, which is currently licensing space at Salem High School. The license goes through the end of this month, and we have the option to renew for two one-year terms. So we were referred to the Buildings and Grounds subcommittee. The committee discussed renewing the license, and I'll invite Chair Miranda or Member Hoffman to from that subcommittee to add in. But what the recommendation was that we approve the 1 year extension of this license with one modification, which is we sync the timing of the license to the school year and fiscal year calendar. So it would renew on December 1, which was when it was going to renew anyway, and it would go through June 30, 2026, as opposed to November 30, 2026. There's no real rationale for the November deadline, which was originally established because that's when the partnership was established, not because it aligned with either their operating schedule, which is 12 months, or our operating schedule, which aligns with the fiscal year. What that will mean is we'll go out to bid in the spring, in the early spring, and they will have to bid for the space. So that is the recommendation of the Buildings and Grounds Subcommittee, and I don't know if Member Miranda or Member Hoffman, if you would like to add anything, but we bring that to you for your consideration.
Do you want us to touch on that now or wait until the point in the agenda?
You can take it up now.
Okay. I basically, and AJ, I totally welcome you to offer whatever thoughts you have. But overall, I think the consensus that we came to is we're super grateful for the programs that we've accepted into our spaces here in Salem, and the benefit for the community is significant. And also, I think it's really important for us to look at the ways that we're utilizing our space. And so the motion that was made was a recommendation for the full committee to renew the contract for Angela's Daycare for December 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. And then between now and, as Elizabeth had stated, between now and around March, we could do some further research and things and determine how we want to go forward with any of these kinds of like longer term rentals with all of our partners.
That is my report.
All done?
All set.
All right. Any subcommittee reports further than the ones we've received? Yep. Member Cornell?
I just want to note that the policies that are coming up for a vote tonight are all ones that came from the MASC in their review. So most of these just bring us in line with Mass General Law. But I do think it's worth noting, and Member Cruz and I talked about this a lot in our last meeting, is in general, we tend to not just sort of like repeat Mass General Law in our policies, but that is the convention with MASC, and we did hire them to help us organize all of this information so that it's a lot more, it's more searchable and it's more aligned with the other districts that use MASC to kind of organize and hold their information. So while we discussed that it wasn't exactly our usual policy, we won't be the one doing the work when it gets changed or reviewed. So that responsibility goes on to MASC. So I just wanted to note that because these changes are kind of, they're kind of clinical. There's nothing particularly, interesting about them.
Right. Any other subcommittee reports? Motions and resolutions. Member Cruz.
Move to approve the athletic coaches stipend agreement with the Salem Teachers Union.
Second.
Motion made by Member Cruz, seconded by Member Cornell. Under discussion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Unanimous. The matter carries.
Move to approve the Angela's preschool daycare and preschool and daycare license renewal.
Second.
Motion made by Member Campbell, seconded by Member Cornell to approve the license renewal with Angela's Preschool and Daycare. Under discussion? Seeing none. Oh, yes.
Does the motion need to be amended to state that we changed the contract to reflect the school year?
We can clarify that in the motion. So,
I will accept that friendly amendment.
okay, a friendly amendment to approve the license renewal for the period of December 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026 for Angela's Preschool and Daycare. Seconded. Under discussion. Member Cruz?
I guess this is a question for the superintendent or the assistant superintendent. Just regarding within the lease, it specifies particular rooms that are being rented out by Angela's Daycare. Is there a process for conversations in the event that they over-enroll or have a wait list for talking about any available space within the building?
There is not an official process for, in this license, changing the rooms. I assume that if this became an issue during the term of the license, that the district leadership and the school leadership would have the conversation. But for now, this set of terms with the change being the length of time is the only change that we're recommending.
And then to clarify, we previously, when we went over the leases and some of the kind of different arrangements that existed within the district, I just want to clarify, Angela's preschool offers free childcare for our students, and then is it a discounted rate for employees of the entire district or just the high school?
It is a subsidized rate for employees of Salem High School staff, school district staff, and so it would be broader than just the high school.
Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none. On the motion to approve as amended, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, all in favor. The matter carries.
I'm going to take this as a group motion to approve policy AA, AC, ACR, ACA, ACE, and ADC for first read.
Seconded.
Motion made by Member Cornell, seconded by Member Campbell. Under discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Any opposed? None are opposed. All in favor. The matter carries. Announcements.
I have a question. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have a question.
How dare you? Two quick announcements. So it was mentioned, no school tomorrow for all schools except Carleton.
Except for Carl.
It is election day. Polls are open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Please remember to vote. And on November 11th, we have our annual Veterans Day ceremony at Salem High School at 11 o'clock, and all are invited to join us for that. Any further announcements? Seeing none.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made by Member Campbell, seconded by Member Cruz. Under discussion, seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, all in favor. The matter carries. We're adjourned.